Hey guys, welcome to lesson 10 of how to make iPhone apps with no programming experience. And in this lesson, we are going to look at some more complicated methods, how to have methods where they accept input data, and as well as returning data to the caller of the method. And then we're going to create a method and see how we can attach it to a button tap. So before we get to the latter part, we're going to start with a playground, and I'm going to show you some examples of more complex methods. So if you're unfamiliar with starting a new playground, you should look at, I think it was lesson 2, where we introduced playgrounds as a way to just test out some code. And I'm just going to name this one Methods Playground. I'm going to save it on my desktop. We're going to start by declaring the person class, just like we've done in our previous playground sessions. And it's just to give us a little more practice in declaring and working with classes. So if you can, follow along on your own laptop or your own computer. And we're going to declare a method called, actually before we do that, let's give this guy some properties so we can practice doing that. And we're going to use these properties in the methods that we're going to declare. So var, I'm going to create a name property. It's going to be of type string. It's going to have an initial, actually let's do things a little bit differently this time. I'm not going to give it an initial value. I'm going to go var age, and it's going to be of type int, which is a number. And instead of setting in the initial value there, if you don't set it in the declaration, you have to set it in the init method. So I'm going to go self.name equals initial name, and self.age equals, let's say, 10. Okay, and now we're going to create a method that will update both the name and age. So let's write func update name and age. Okay, and inside here, we're going to update the name to Tom and update the age to 12, let's say. So below here, let's create a new person object. Var a equals person. And as you can see from the values on the right hand side, the initial name, the name property is set to initial name and the age is set to 10. Now if we call the method update name and age, you can see now the result is telling us that the name Tom and the age is 12. So let's verify that by just doing that, and you can see that the name property is at Tom right now. Now that method, update name and age, would be a lot more useful if we could actually pass in the name and the age and have the properties set to the values that we pass in, instead of these hard-coded values. And hard-code is just a programming term to describe that the values are set to a non-changing value, which is what these two are. So calling this method will always set the properties to these hard-coded values. Instead, we want to set these properties to whatever values are passed in to make it dynamic. So let's see how we can do that. Inside the set of round brackets here, we can just declare two parameters, and they're declared the same way we've done in the properties up here. So let's call it name string. So that's the first parameter, comma, the next one, age int. And just like that, we've declared that this method accepts two parameters, one of type string and one of type int. And these parameter names that we give it here, we can refer to those names inside these methods to refer to the values that are passed in. So if I wanted to set the property name to the name that's passed in, then I use this parameter name and I write that. Or you can even change this to say name to set so it's not as confusing. Okay, and if we want to set the age property of this person object to the age that's passed in, let's change that and write age to set. We write age to set. And now you can see that the playground is complaining about this method call because it knows that the method needs 2 parameters to be passed in, and right now we're not passing in any. Okay, so let's pass it in. And let me actually erase that and erase this. If we were to write a line of code to call that method, and we start by typing in the object we want to call the method on, because that's part of the method call, so we go A, which is our object, dot, and then from this menu, you can see that the update name and age method appears. Now I press enter, and now Xcode has pretty much filled in the method call for us, and I can press tab on my keyboard to tab between the 2 parameters that I need to specify. Now pay attention to this and take note that the second parameter you can see has the parameter name followed by colon, and then I'm going to fill in an int in here to pass in, but the first parameter doesn't have the parameter name. And that's kind of how the syntax goes. So let's fill in a name here, and I'm going to type it as Brad, and I'm going to press tab to go to the next parameter, and I'm going to set the age to 15. So I'm going to pass it to 15. Now if there were 3 parameters that I needed to pass in, it would actually look like comma and then the 3rd parameter name followed by colon and then the value I pass in. It's always just the first parameter that I don't have to put the parameter name or parameter label there. If the method only accepted 1 parameter, then I wouldn't have to put any parameter label, and it just looked like something like that. But when you have more than 1 parameter in a method call, after the first one, the subsequent ones you have to call it with the parameter name. Usually that's not a problem because Xcode kind of auto-completes the method call, so it's very easy when you start typing the method name and then you just press enter, and it kind of fills in all of the labels for you, and all you have to do is tab between the values and fill it in. So now when I call the name property, you can see in the result it's set to Brad and the age is set to 15. So that's very simply how you can declare a method which accepts data to be used inside of the method. Now what if we wanted to create a method that would return a value to the caller? For example, you may want a method that performs some sort of calculation and returns the result to the calling to the caller. Or perhaps you have a method that performs some sort of task and it should return back to the caller some sort of status, whether that task succeeded or failed. Let's create a method that will increase the age of the object, of the person object, and then return the new age back to the caller. So let's put 1 parameter, age to increase by, and it's going to be an int. And now to specify a return value, all you need to do is use this dash symbol and then the arrow. And now you can specify the type of data that the method is going to return to the caller. In this case, it's going to be an int. And then I'm going to do the curly braces. And now I'm going to write self.age plus equals, and this is going to take the number and it's going to add it to the existing number in the property. So I'm going to type age to increase by. Now another way I could have written this is self.age equals self.age plus age to increase by. Either of these lines of code can be used. They're equivalent. So the first one is a little bit of shorthand. Okay, so now I've actually taken the parameter, the input parameter, and added it to the age. And now I have to return a value from this method because I've specified this up here as a return value. So we have to use the return keyword. And then I have to put some sort of data here to return to the caller, and it has to be of the type int because that's what I specified there. So I'm just going to return the new age, which happens to be what we set into here. So I'm just going to return self.age. Okay, so let's try this out. I'm going to erase those two. I'm going to declare a new variable called new age equals a dot increase age. And I'm going to increase it by 5. So the reason I'm creating a new variable is because this method returns some sort of value. So whatever value it returns, I want to store it into new age. So now I've made this method call, and it passes in 5 into the increase age method. It's going to add 5 to self.age, which was 15, because this line here set it to 15. So it added 5 to that, and then it's going to return the current value in self.age, which is 20. So I take that value that this method returns, and I store it into new age. So now when I just check what's in here, you can see in the result here, there's 20. So note that when you have this symbol here with the data type that the method is going to return, you have to have a return keyword in your method. Now, in addition to that, after you return some data, that method is done. Even if you write some code right here below the return statement, it won't get executed. As soon as it executes return whatever data, that's as far as it goes. The execution stops at this line and then returns to the caller. Now both of these methods that we declared for this person class, they're called instance methods. And that means that these methods must be called on a person object. So you can see down here that we created a person object and we assigned it to the variable a, and we're always calling these methods using a dot the method name, because the method call structure or syntax is the object that you want to call the method on, and then dot, and then the method name. Well, there's another kind of method called type methods, and these methods don't require any sort of object to call. Instead, you specify the class dot method. So let's demonstrate. In the person class, I'm going to create a class method. So in order to create a class method, it looks just like a regular method, except that it has a class keyword in front of it. So don't get confused with declaring a new class, because that's not what we're doing here. You go class, func, and then let's say that this method will return the average age. I'm just going to return a hard-coded number for the purpose of demonstration. I'm just going to put 50. So if we wanted to call this new method that we created, we don't type a dot, because this is a class method or type method as it's called in Swift. We don't call it on an instance or an object. We call it on the class itself. So you have to write person dot average age. And because it returns a value, I probably want to just create a new variable and store that value that it returns. So when would you use a class method versus an instance method? Well, by and large, you'll be declaring and using instance methods, because those are the ones that pertain to the object in question, and those are more commonly used. Whereas a class method is typically used for a quick calculation or to return some values that don't have to do with any specific object. So you can see here in my example, the other two methods specifically deal with that person objects name and age, whereas the class method is kind of asking a general question like what's the average age of a person. This is not that great of an example, but when we go back to Xcode and we're working with building our apps, you're going to see some great examples of some type methods in the UIKit classes. I just wanted to introduce these type methods to you so that later on when we're working in our Xcode project and we come across some type methods that belong to the UIKit classes, I'll be able to point them out and you'll be able to understand what it is and then connect the dots. Okay, and now we're going to go back into our Xcode project for our card game War, and we're going to see how we can attach a method to a button tap in the storyboard. Okay, so I'm back in our Xcode project that we've been working on for the last couple of lessons, and I'm also in Assistant Editor view where we have the view controller.swift on the right hand side and the storyboard on the left hand side. And just like how we created IB outlet properties for all of the storyboard elements, we can do the same thing with creating a method that is going to be attached to our play round button. So I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard. I'm going to click the play round button and I'm going to drag it over here. Instead of putting it up here where you declare properties, I'm going to put it outside of any other methods, but above this closing bracket, kind of where you would normally declare a method. And in here, for the connection, I don't want to put outlet because that would be creating an IB outlet property. Instead, I want to put action. And this is going to create an action method. For the event, you can leave it as touch up inside. And that just means that this event is when the user taps the button and when they let go, when they raise their finger and they let go of the button, that their finger is still inside and within the button. So that's what touch up inside means. So for the type, I'm just going to put my UI button. And then for the name, I'm going to put play round tapped. Okay, so now it creates a method for me. And you can see that this looks like a normal method, except that it's got this IB action keyword. And just like the IB outlet keyword, this specifies that this method can be connected to an event for an element in our storyboard. In this case, it's going to be an event for our button. And just like the property, you can see that there's a filled in gray circle here, indicating that this method is connected to an element in our storyboard. And also, just like properties, if you have a 2-button mouse and you right click this guy, or if you have a single button mouse, you can hold down Control and click it and you get this menu. You can see that here touch up inside is connected to this method play round tapped, as well as it's connected to an outlet play round button. Right, so it's kind of similar to the way we did properties. In here, I can put in any code that I want executed when this button is tapped. Now, this method has one parameter. The parameter name is sender, and the type is UI button, and that's what type this guy is. So what this parameter is that it gives me access, or it gives me a reference to the button that triggered this method. I don't really need it because I already have a property here, play round button, that we connected to that element. So, I have two ways of referring to that button, either with this sender parameter or with the property, the IB outlet property that I connected to the button. So just for demonstration purposes, when this play round tapped is tapped, I'm going to change the button name back to play round, because up here in the view did load, we changed it to play. So in the future, obviously we're going to be, when the play round button is tapped, we're going to be changing card images, randomizing the cards, and so on and so forth. But for now, I just want to demonstrate this method. So I'm going to copy this code, I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to change the title of the button back to play round. So I'm going to run it. So you can see that this line of code in the view.didLoad changed the button title to play. When I tap it, however, it's going to execute this method, and it's going to execute this line of code, which is going to change it back to play round. So you can see that. Now when you run your app and the screen is just black, you might think your app has crashed. Well, there's one thing that beginners actually accidentally do. So let me demonstrate. In the code, some beginners accidentally set a breakpoint by clicking this gray area here. You'll notice that when you click this gray area, it puts this blue mark here, and that's what's called a breakpoint. When we get to debugging our code and tracing our code, we're going to be using and learning about breakpoints, but for now, breakpoints is just going to pause the execution of your code. So for example, if I accidentally set a breakpoint here, when I run my app and I click this button to run this code, it's going to highlight this line in green because I've set a breakpoint here. And this just means that the execution of my program has stopped at this point. It's paused, right? So if you've accidentally set a breakpoint, you want to stop your project, and then you just want to click it again to deactivate. You can see now it's kind of still there, but it's deactivated. It's in faint blue. Or you can completely drag it off and kill the breakpoint by just clicking and dragging it off that bar. See, if you had your breakpoint, let's say here in the view.didLoad method, and then you ran your app, it would stop at that point. So you wouldn't even see your loaded screen. So that's just something to watch out for. If you've accidentally set a breakpoint, you can just drag it off and then stop your project and then rerun it. In the next lesson, we're going to generate a random number when we tap the play round button, and we're going to store that inside a variable.